It's a weird question and maybe an unfair question, but is this Baylor team clicking on all cylinders because Keyonte George is out? Let's talk about it. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am slowly turning into a tan. That is Stephen Vaughn, or Stephen from Virginia, as you may know him, a famous Baylor basketball guru, Baylor sports guru, really. Thank you for making Locked On Baylor your first listen every single day. And Stephen, let's jump right into it. It's a weird thing to say. Somebody's hurt, right? A player's hurt who has given you a lot this year, your leading scorer this season. And maybe him being hurt is not the catalyst to why Baylor's playing so well recently, but there's a question on the table. With Keyonte George out, this team has now gone 2-0 and dominated two pretty good teams. What is it? Is the ball being moved better? Is his absence contributing to how this team is now so cohesive?
So I think the first thing I'd say is that the team is better on defense with Keyonte George. I don't want to say the team is better without Keyonte George, but it's certainly better on defense. The switching is a lot better. They're a lot better in man defense, and I've really felt that Dale Bonner is an insane defender, right?
Yeah.
So you really gain something with Dale Bonner on defense, but you lose a lot with Keyonte George on the bench in terms of offense. So I think the big thing for me is, and you guys have talked about it on the show, is that Baylor is not a very good defensive team on KenPom.
Yeah.
And they improve on defense when they get Dale Bonner on the floor and Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua on the floor. And no team in the KenPom era has won with less than a top 22 ranked defense.
Yeah.
So for sure, when I'm thinking Baylor needs to be better on defense to win the games they want to win, and they're better on defense without Keyonte George, that's a fair point, but they are not better without Keyonte George.
What's so intriguing, Stephen, and again, it's weird. It's like, all right, there's this dialogue over a player is out. How is Baylor better without a lottery pick player? And I want to say very early on, too, I'm not happy Keyonte George is hurt. I don't wish that on Keyonte. I hope his draft stock is not affected at all, and I hope he's back in the next game. But what do you, I mean, and it's a tough question, and neither of us are the basketball on the basketball coaching staff. What do you do when Keyonte does come back to keep the ball movement there, to keep the defensive intensity there, to get Dale Bonner those minutes? Because if Keyonte comes back and Dale Bonner's only playing 5 minutes, you saw what he could do in 30 minutes. To me, that's invaluable. You've got to keep that out there.
Well, and we've also seen a lot of improvement and growth in Dale Bonner's game since he first stepped on campus. I'll tell you, when Dale Bonner first stepped on campus, I was really excited about his defensive intensity and the way that he plays. And he plays a really unselfish game. So for me, I'm really excited to see Dale Bonner get more minutes. I think this team really needs Keyonte George, though, because if you look especially in terms of ball handling and playmaking, they've struggled down the stretch in some of these games without Keyonte, especially the Oklahoma State game. And you think about the lead that was big and dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. And how many times this year the ball has gotten turned over in the corner in late minute situations. It doesn't help that to have Keyonte George on the sideline. You need an extra ball handler. You need an extra guy who can pass in. You need an extra guy who can get fouled and go to the line and shoot free throws. I definitely think that Keyonte George coming back is going to help this team a lot.
Stephen, what month is it?
It's March, baby.
This is March. There's the Hello Friends, the Jim Nance and the music, and you hear the one shining moment, and it kind of takes you back to 2021. I mean, we're on the cusp of, all right, Stephen, Bear Games question of the day. That's all throwback. Is there a better tournament in America? I'm getting smart at this. Is there a better tournament, a better sporting event, a better sports something than March Madness in the world?
I don't think so, and it's mainly because March Madness is like March Madness for a whole month. You're getting a whole month of basketball games, and I just don't think the NFL playoffs for a whole month are as good up and down, and I just don't think the NBA playoffs are as good, and I just don't think the MLB playoffs are as good, and they last longer than a month now, so it's really hard to just pinpoint 1 month. There's no better tournament, and this is March, baby. We sleep in May.
Yeah, we can't even sleep in April anymore because now they play the championship in April. Hopefully we're still alive at that point in time. This whole Yeah, the World Cup maybe you can make a case for, but this whole month is built around conference tournament basketball. It's built around March Madness, and we've talked about the ceiling Baylor has. Their floor to me is out in the first round of 32, likely round of 32 being the floor. Ceiling, still seeing some national championship prowess with how good the offense is. But again, I want to go back to this Keyonte George conversation that we're on. He is, you're looking at guys like Adam Flaggo and LJ Cryer, who have national championship rings. Jonathan Chamo-Chachua, who is a major contributor. Flo Thamba, who's a major contributor. Then you got Keyonte George, the new blood. Is he to you? This is wild, Stephen, that I like, but I think it's kind of a reasonable question. Remember Kendall Brown last year? Toward this part of the year, you thought, we're not seeing peak Kendall Brown. Do you think we're seeing peak Keyonte George, like throwing him back in the fold? Like we've seen it 2 games now. I don't think that the retraction of Keyonte George makes this team less of a national championship contender based on what we've seen. It's how they played. Steven, I don't want to be so explicit about it, but look, I mean, is he playing basketball that's going to carry this team to a national championship, or is the unit playing better together when he's not in here in March?
So here's what I think is really going to be important about Keyonte George coming back to the team is late game situations and having a guy who can score like Keyonte can score. I went into the West Virginia game and firsthand saw him score 32 points and saw him make a one-footed three that he was fading away into the corner to shoot. And there's just not a lot of talents like him in the game. And so to have one of those on your team in March, when you're going to have late game situations, you're going to have out of bounds plays. You're going to have plays that you draw up for people to score to get tough buckets and tough opportunities. I think Keyonte is going to be right there because here's the thing. It's not even necessarily that Keyonte has to take the shot. You have 3 amazing guards who start, and then 2 more amazing guards off the bench because we haven't even mentioned Langston Love yet. And you have so many scoring options on this team that who are you going to cover? And not many teams have 3 great perimeter defenders who can guard all 3 of your guards and also have big men who can stay with Chamo-Chachua and Flo Thamba.
So Chamo-Chachua, Flo Thamba. This segues perfectly in our next conversation of like where do you see Baylor in March, Stephen? Like you've got a basketball mind. That's your sport. Am I wrong? You're a baseball guy too. But
I'm a baseball and basketball guy, but those are my 2 sports.
Yeah, where Baylor is right now compared to where they were going into the tournament in 2021. That's my litmus test. It's unfair because it's a national championship team, but
it's unfair. But I think once you've seen a national championship, you're gonna compare it to that forever, right?
You have to, right? It gives you, and now I know what it looks like to be that caliber of a team. So why wouldn't I? Like that's the standard. So I'm going to compare everything else to what the standard is. Are we wrong for doing that?
I don't think we're wrong for doing that. And I think it's really interesting that you bring this up because I think this is kind of interesting as to where Baylor has become a basketball power and it wasn't before. So when Baylor wasn't very good at basketball, or at least wasn't perceived to be very good at basketball.
You were there. You were around for that.
I was there. It was hard to tell people, or it was hard to judge what was a national championship team. And when we were, watching that 2021 team, I think we had moments where we're like, okay, this is what a championship team looks like. But we didn't know because we'd never seen one.
Right.
So now that we've seen one, we're only going to point to that team because that's what a championship team looked like. And look, I'll tell you that I think that's the best basketball team, at least college basketball team I've ever seen. They switched on defense. When you got by one, you ran into a teammate. They passed up open looks for teammates who had better shots. And that's really what team sports is all about. And so for that to happen, we saw that in championship Baylor. I see that on the offensive end with this Baylor. I'm not really sure I see it on the defensive end. That Baylor team was so physical and so tough. I never remember teams going on Virginia or Marquette-like runs.
Yeah.
I remember when the 2020 team beat Kansas and Lawrence. They got up on Kansas early, just like this one did, but they held them down and they didn't let them up after that. So there's a big difference between the two. And I think that this Baylor team just isn't as solid on defense. And that's why when we're talking about where we're going to see Baylor in March, probably see them topping out at the Sweet 16.
Steven, let's dive into that. But first, I got to tell everybody at home about FanDuel. Right now, folks, it's one of my favorite parts about FanDuel. You can go on and bet you can bet on intramural Baylor, intramural tennis. And I bet you didn't bet that I would go 2-0 yesterday, and I did. I absolutely did. Depsai, take that. Granted, yes, neither of my opponents showed up, and they were both forfeits, but that is still 2-0, and you would have gotten your money at FanDuel. It's got everything. Even more so, it's got March Madness. You can go bet on who's going to make the Final Four. You can go bet on who's going to make the national championship, and right now there's a no-sweat first bet. $1,000, up to $1,000, if your first bet doesn't hit. You get that $1,000 in bonus bets, and you can use that and use that and use that for whatever you want to use it for. All of that's the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You got spreads, money lines, totals, points, rebounds, assists. You can pick all that stuff for the NBA and college basketball. Heck, if you're really weird and like the NHL, you can bet on that stuff too. I do that sometimes. Even with same-game parlays, there are bigger and better chances at awesome payouts. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Learn more at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Trust me on this one. The official sports betting partner of the NBA and the NFL. Steven, that's right. 2-0. You heard that correctly. Now, my opponents did not show up. That is the case. The depth side guys were not about it. They were too scared to even be there. But your boy's a tennis guy now.
I'm not very good at tennis, man. I got to be honest. Like, as a baseball player, I've hit very few home runs in my life. But if you get me on a tennis court, that ball is leaving the park, my guy. It is
See you later.
It's like an airplane. It's going to have some stewardesses on it. That baby's going.
Oh, Steven, I hope the Baylor Bears are going deep into March. But you just said out in the Sweet 16. I've kind of been where am I going to reasonably put Baylor? They meet a Big East team in the round of 32, the Sweet 16, like a Marquette, and they just kind of get dominated, kind of get pummeled by somebody. This team doesn't have that 2021, I'm bigger than you. I'm a dog. I don't see that all the time with this group of guys. Defensively, especially, why do you have this team bounced in the second weekend? First day of the second weekend.
So for me, I actually was thinking about maybe even earlier. I saw Kentucky as an 8 seed in somebody's bracket today, and I thought to myself, boy, I'd really hate to face Kentucky in the second round.
Yeah. Like if they move to a 7 and you got Baylor, Kentucky, and
and that feels kind of like a Baylor North Carolina matchup from last year, where it's a team with a lot of pedigree, a team with a lot of expectations, a team with a lot of talent, a team that didn't fulfill a lot of its promises, but still is very good and very dangerous. I think that's the type of team. It's all matchup based for me. I think this could be a team where, like 2010, if they get a favorable road, they can get to the Elite Eight. But if they don't get a favorable draw, if they get one of these schools kind of early, like a Virginia or Marquette, teams that they wouldn't play, obviously, but a team like that.
Yeah.
Kentucky, North Carolina, those kind of teams that they could get in the second round could be a really tough out for the Bears. And part of the reason I'm, I guess, skeptical is because I've seen recently how Baylor has handled late game situations. Think about that Oklahoma State game. That game should not have been a 6-point game.
Yeah.
It was a lot bigger of a margin. And how many times this year, I mean, this happened, was it TCU where Adam Flagler also had a similar play in the corner where their
ball goes out of bounds, and yeah, same thing.
It's the same thing. Adam Flagler is a great player. Adam Flagler is a first-team All-Big 12 player. Adam Flagler hopefully is an NBA draft pick. I love watching him play. But that kind of stuff is stuff that is eerily similar of stuff that I've seen when Baylor was an early out in the NCAA tournament. And I just feel kind of like this is not the same level of team as we had in 20 or 21. I feel like, last year we didn't see Baylor as getting eliminated in the second game of the tournament.
Yeah.
And it happened. So maybe it's unfair to this team to compare them to that team the same way it's unfair to compare this team to the 2021 team. But in what I've seen, I'm just kind of looking at it and saying they struggle in late game situations and they struggle on defense. And those are two things you're going to need to have sewn up by the tournament. Otherwise, you're going to lose because having great guard play is what you need in the tournament, but it's not going to help if you can't stop anybody. It's not going to help if you're turning the ball over on your side when you have a 6-point lead and 46 seconds to go.
Stephen, the one thing, like, defensively, yeah, that we've beaten that dead horse for the whole season now as a fan base, that this defense is just not very good, and the numbers back that up. It will be one of the worst Power 6 defenses in the NCAA tournament. That is just going to be the case, especially when you start getting to the second weekend, when you get to the round of 32, that dwindles even more. You're now becoming the worst defense in the NCAA tournament. Not a good spot to be in. What I think might kill Baylor even more so than that is we've talked a lot about volume shooting. I'm going to renege a little bit here. I saw a metric this week that Baylor actually loses more often when they shoot less threes. So kind of the more threes they shoot, the higher their odds of winning, which makes some good sense. But what you see,
they do make a good percentage.
They shoot a lot of threes. They are the number one Big 12 team in three-point shooting. And Scott Drew said preseason that would be the identity of this team. One of the big problems to me has been shot selection in these games they've lost. Kansas in the second half, where, look, Keyonte he took some bad shots in the first half, but he made them. Second half, took some bad shots, and he missed them, as he probably should, and the rest of these guys should. They get really late into the shot clock playing ISO ball, especially with Keyonte out there. You see it a lot with Keyonte out there. The ball movement seems stagnant, and then somebody jacks up a three that's not a very quality shot at the end of the shot clock, and it's typically not going to go. As much as we nitpick the defense, that's kind of how I see this team. That's where I see the downfall right now, is these late in the shot clock, jack it up because out of necessity, and the opposing team rebounding and taking advantage.
Well, and I also think, how many times has Adam Flagler been forced to take that little step back three? He takes like a real quick dribble in the step back three, and it rims out, barely hits the front of the rim and goes out. I've seen that a lot this year, where kind of LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler have been forced to take bailout threes. The problem is they're such great three-point shooters as they may make them sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's hard to call it a bad shot. Well, the bad offensive part of those possessions is that they got stagnant. You know, they dribbled the ball a lot and didn't really move it. And Keyonte George, maybe he's been guilty of some of that. I've seen some bad offense from Keyonte. I think sometimes Keyonte is so great at going on one-on-one that he really just wants to go one-on-one all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's great because he's one of the best players in the country. He's going to be a lottery pick in the NBA draft. But sometimes the offense really needs to flow a little bit more, and the ball really needs to move a little bit more. And I think when we're comparing it to the championship team, think about how much the ball really moved from side to side, from in and out of the paint on that team. The ball doesn't move the same way here. And This is still a great offense. The ball just doesn't move that way here. I think that's kind of what you need to be a national championship offense.
Stephen, you said flow. You said F-L-O-W, flow. But Flo Thamba, Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua, your perspective. The 2021 team had Flo Thamba and Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua. They were not loaded down low. Mark Vital added a little more muscle, but Baylor has not had an elite big man in a long time. They won a championship without an elite big man. Is this a problem to you, or are you completely cool with the Bears' struggles in the paint?
So for me, I think where the Bears are kind of missing is they really wish Josh Ojawuna was a little bit further along in his development, because he's definitely going to be a great big man. I think this team is just a little too soon for him. The Bears are definitely struggling in the front court. I think Flo has some problems finishing at the rim. He's a great rebounder. He's great at getting fouled. I wish he would finish a little bit more, and I wish he would make a few more free throws when he does get to the line. But Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua is getting better, and I think that's helping this team. If you're going to call Baylor a sneaky team in the NCAA tournament as far as 2 or 3 seeds go, it's going to be because Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua improved this team from a better defense than currently where they are. They're the 85th ranked defense on KenPom, right?
Yeah.
So they're better than that with Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua with them, because they obviously haven't had him all year. How much better is what's going to determine whether a national championship team or not.
Even I've got here pulled up all of Joe Lunardi's March Madness where he's got everybody, and currently has Baylor sitting as a 2 seed comfortably. He has Baylor as the 6th best team in America on the one line. Before I even go into this, do you think there's a way to push this team into the 1 seed conversation?
I think if they won the Big 12 tournament, that would be, especially with a win over Kansas in the process, I think that would be a big step. Me personally, I think Kansas should be the number 1 overall seed. And I think that if Kansas splits the Big 12 with Texas and Texas wins the Big 12 tournament, that Texas should be a number 1 seed. Or, this Big 12 conference has been so by far and away the best conference in America. 2 Big 12 teams should be number 1 seeds.
Then here, there is, and yeah, I think the Texas conversation is not a bad one. I hope they don't. And Lunardi has Texas at 7, Baylor at 6. So the Bears still have some leverage there on UT, but you're right. If Texas, which at the time of recording, we don't know if they beat TCU. If they did and they beat Kansas, have a good run in the Big 12 tournament, both those teams should be 1 seeds. Baylor, that kind of the same thing applies. They beat Iowa State now without Caleb Grill on Saturday and make a bit of a run in the Big 12 tournament. Should be in the conversation. But even aside from that, you've got in the West, according to Lunardi, Houston, Baylor, Arizona, and Xavier being the top 4 seeds, meaning Baylor would meet Arizona in the Sweet 16. What do you think about that?
I've not been a big fan of Arizona this season, to be honest. I think UCLA is the better team.
Any
in the
Pac-12 team, by the way. I love playing a Pac-12 team. Bring that on.
Yeah, the Pac-12 is not a very strong conference, and it's not a very strong Power 6 conference. It's stronger than the ACC, but, they're kind of hovering right around there with the Mountain West in terms of who's the 4th or 5th best conference. And Arizona, to me, has been kind of fraudulent. They've lost some games to quad 2 opponents, and they are clearly the 2nd best team in the Pac-12 to UCLA, and Baylor beat UCLA.
Yeah. UCLA, also a team right there on the one line, and Baylor beat them, and the strength of the schedule is vastly different. Like, obviously, Baylor played a much tougher schedule, and that's why they have 8 losses. 8 losses, a lot of losses to be talking about a 1 seed. But you did it in the Big 12, and everybody's going to lose. Kansas lost 3 straight at one point. Everybody's going to do that in this league, and I really hope that this conference is not banged up to the point where the teams struggle. We've seen it. We've seen conferences eat each other alive, get to March Madness.
We've seen the Big 12 do it. We've seen people say, you said the Big 12 is so great, and their teams didn't make it very far.
It's always Texas, too. It's always Texas. They're the ones that they have to ruin it for everybody.
Well, the sad thing about that is that Texas has fired all these coaches recently because of things, not on the program, but also because of not having success in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure if it's fair to fire coaches off of 1-game performances, little snippets, but if it gets them, I don't really think it's gotten Texas where they wanted to. So Texas could be an early exit again.
Yeah, if you're firing guys off 1-game snippets, Scott Drew would have been on the chopping block for a few more years. Granted, the Baylor situation was much different than UT, and thankfully the athletic directors in Drew's tenure have had a bit longer of a leash for their coaches. Steven, before we roll out, what are the big talking points? Anything big that you've got on your radar here as we hit March for this Baylor basketball team? What are you really fired up about?
So I'm really fired up to have Keyonte George back. I know we've talked a little bit about I want to see him in March because he's a shot maker. He's a shot creator. I want to see him have his moment. Adam Flagler shooting 40% from 3. LJ Cryer shooting 43% from 3. I want to see this Baylor team and see if the Golden State Warriors live by the 3, die by the 3 strategy can work for them in the NCAA tournament.
It works in a 7-game format, a best 4 out of 7 format. Will it work in a one? And that's why the NCAA tournament's the best tournament in sports, because the team that wins every year probably isn't the best team in America. Not always, at least. And that's what's so glorious about it, because the 1-game format. And we get it soon. It's like 2 weeks away. I'll be in Cabo next week, so that week basically doesn't exist. So it's only 1 week away for yours truly.
Oh, isn't that Baylor does spring break a little early, don't they?
So stupid early. It's March 2nd today when the show airs, and it's like, why is it already almost spring break? Cabo's 75 degrees. 75, not bad, by the way. It's snowing in most of America. But Cancun's 88. We should have gone to Cancun. That's where we went last year, and it was good. I actually accepted the locked on job while I was in Cancun last year. Who's going to call me this week, you think?
Oh, Scott Drew?
Nah, maybe. Give me a job with the Bears. That'd be awesome. Steven, before we get you out of here, where can folks find you, your basketball tweets during March Madness, or anything you put out?
So I'm at Steven from VA on Twitter, and I do an occasional podcast with Chase Gilmer called Going Down the Line. We've been off for a few weeks. Just life's been getting in the way, but we try to step it in there every 2 weeks or so.
Beautiful. Go check it out. Down the line. Down the line?
Going down the line.
Going down the line. I got to get it all right. Steven, thanks for joining the show. For everybody that listened, thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. This has been and always will be. Come back tomorrow. Robbie Triano joins the show. We talk Big 12 hoops, Baylor, Iowa State, Caleb Grill, all of that. Brandon Miller, too, I'm sure. Locked on. Come back tomorrow. Baylor.